started. Thanks everybody for being here. I do a lot of these talks. I've been doing them for a long time, so I appreciate y'all being here. Even if I just have one person show up to a talk, which has happened in the past, if I can make a difference, an impact on you, then it accomplished my mission. Yeah, we're going to focus a lot on the immune system, flu, cold flu, even COVID to some degree. And so my name is Dr. Ernesto Medina. I run a functional medicine holistic health clinic. I'm the owner operator of it. We have a location in Round Rock and one in Westlake, in the Westlake Hills, right? And who's heard of functional medicine? Who knows what functional medicine is? Yeah. Perfect, right? So I did get the question of what it is. So briefly, I'll talk about it. Essentially, in my practice, what we do is we work with people who have chronic health conditions. And usually they've seen doctor after specialist and haven't had any answers or any relief. And so they find someone like me because what we focus on doing is trying to get to the root cause of their chronic health issue. And we do that through deep investigation, even deeper than most specialists do. And then we primarily use tools of diet, nutrition, and lifestyle strategies to improve their overall health, which then in turn equates to better control of their illness. Make sense? And when I say diet, nutrition, lifestyle, we're talking about how they eat, what they eat, timing of what they eat, how they sleep, what their sleeping hours are like. If they exercise, what kind of exercise do they do? What supplements do they need or are they missing, right? So combination of all these things. And then supplements. And do they have any nutrient deficiencies, right? So we're going to talk quite a bit about IVs, nutritional IVs, because that can be a game changer as far as supporting your immune system and bulletproofing your immune system, right? So this is my Instagram here. I do have a YouTube channel. I put a lot of free information, health information on there. So you can always follow those. I have different webinars I've done on holistic approaches to mental health, to gut health, to hormones and menopause, perimenopause, and things like that. So go and follow that if you like. All right, quick disclaimer. I always put this in here for liability reasons, but always talk to your doctor before starting any kind of nutrition or supplement program. The irony of this statement is that most medical doctors don't know anything about nutrition or nutrient deficiencies. They never test you for them. They never recommend them to you. And we're going to talk about why that is, but largely because in medical school, doctors aren't trained on nutrition, right? And that's unfortunate, but this is what we heavily focus on, right? Nutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and how to bulletproof your system to fight infections, okay? All right. So I honestly believe that this country is on the verge of a huge healthcare revolution right now, right? And if you've been watching the news or the information that's been coming out lately, this is a big one that just happened. FDA just announced they will be banning red dye from food. Why is that significant? Well, 30 years ago, the FDA found that red dye, number 3, was linked to cancer. And they took it out of all cosmetics, but left it in food, right? And common sense would say, well, if it's possibly cancerous in cosmetics, why would you not take it out of food? And for the last 30 years, the FDA said, well, there's insufficient evidence to say that if it's in food, it can cause cancer. Well, just last week, they finally announced, after pressure from nonprofits combined with RFK Jr.'s efforts, FDA has finally announced that they will ban red dye from foods, right? After 30 years, they don't have any new information now that they didn't have then, right? But pressure, finally they crumbled and are going to make some changes, right? And this is a very small thing, but it's only the beginning, I think. Okay? Any fans of the Joe Rogan podcast? All right, okay. Everybody has a different opinion about the guy, but I like him because of the guests he has, right? I'm big into the biohackers and the neuroscientists that he has on his podcast, and really they go on there to talk about their research and the latest information coming out. And this brother and sister team, they were on there just last month, and they've been hugely impactful in changing the FDA's decision on these food additives. And The brother, he was a lobbyist for the food industry, and he was a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry. So he knows the ins and outs of how pharmaceutical and food companies get chemicals to stay in foods when they're suspected to be toxic or cancerous, right? So now he's gearing all his efforts to getting them out of the food. His sister, she was a medical doctor trained at Stanford. She was doing a residency in surgery and really came to the realization that she was working in a sick management care system, not a health care system. Meaning everything she was doing for patients was just a Band-Aid fix. It wasn't actually addressing their health overall. It was a Band-Aid fix. They would stay sick and then send them on their way. So she came to that realization and now is making a huge effort to change at the foundational level, food, toxins in the environment, and awareness that medicine doesn't have training in nutrition. And that can be a big piece of people's health. How about this shooting of the United Healthcare CEO? Who heard about that story? Pretty big. Just happened last month, right? So if you hadn't heard about it, CEO of United Healthcare was killed by an upset patient, I guess. And an investigation into United Healthcare and to the CEO discovered that he was using an AI software to deny 90% of medical claims to patients, right? So you go to the doctor says, yeah, we'll do this treatment, this imaging. They submit it to the insurance, and the insurance comes back and says, nope, not medically necessary, we're not going to pay for this, despite it being medically necessary, right? So it was discovered 90% of claims were being denied, hence why they were so upset. Since this story came out, there's been a number of other medical doctors and professionals coming out sharing their stories of their patients getting denied for medically necessary treatments and procedures. So it's becoming more and more evident. And for years, I've talked to people about you cannot rely on your insurance company to care for your health. Nobody's going to care for your health more than you. And so the knowledge I share today, I really want to empower you to take control of your health and know that there are things you can do to improve your overall health and defend from infections. Okay? So this was a big one. I think more and more information is going to come out from other insurance companies of how they deny claims that are necessary for a lot of patients. All right, so why bulletproof your immune system? We had people say about, well, they don't want to get sick, avoiding the cold and flu. So Amy mentioned that someone was supposed to come in today. They had RSVP'd, but got sick with the flu, and so now they're staying at home. But from a business owner perspective, right, so I meet with a lot of other business owners. If I'm sick, I can't work, I can't produce in my business. So the less sick days, the more paydays, right? The more sick days. If I'm out of my business, it's not making money. Huge issue for me, right? So from a business owner perspective, and I believe I've read before coming in here that the number one cause of lost days of work is the cold, the common cold, right? All right, so why bulletproof your immune system? Well, obviously we have the flu. Every year about 50 to 60,000 people die from complications of the flu. And really the only tool we have in existence is the flu shot, right? So again, you're relying on the flu shot, but if you look at statistics from the CDC website on how effective the flu shot is each year, it's anywhere between 30%, sometimes as low as 20%, up to about 50, 55% effective, right? They don't really know because they're guessing based on mutations of the strain each year. So they make a guess, they start producing the vaccine. If they guess right, they get high effectiveness. If they guess wrong, it's very low effectiveness. The problem with that is we don't actually know if it's effective or not until a year or two later when the statistics come out. So each year they're just guessing for you, right? So not a hugely reliable tool. You have Tamiflu, the medication, which from what I read on how effective it is, it decreases symptoms by about 16 hours. So it gives you like half a day back from illness. And that's only in young, healthy people, right? If you're high risk, if you're elderly, effectiveness is less, okay? So flu. Everybody remember these days? Pandemic days, right? So my perspective is a little different than most on the pandemic. I was living in California in Silicon Valley when the pandemic hit, and our counties were the strictest counties of all of California, probably of all the United States, on par with New York City. First to shut down, last to open. Businesses stayed closed about 2 years in my areas. My wife and I waited it out for a year. We didn't like where things were headed. We were headed to vaccine mandates and passport cards, not being able to go to restaurants or anything without proof of vaccination. And so a year in, we decided to leave and we came here. And we got here. There, when we left, we couldn't even leave your house without a mask on. We got here, and there's a St. Patrick's Day party going on at the Domain with no mask. It was like a whole nother dimension. It was crazy. And so we loved it as soon as we got here. But the pandemic is a big one because it brought to light a lot of the weaknesses our healthcare system has, right? In the early days of the pandemic, there were no treatments, medications, there was no vaccines. And so as you all noticed, the healthcare system crumbled in the absence of a vaccine. Turns out, a place like Restore was probably the best place you could go to prevent and lessen severity of COVID. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in a bit, okay? We got monkeypox, right? There's always a new virus coming, right? Monkeypox, I think, came on the scene last year. The rush to develop a vaccine. You always hear it on the news. Bird flu, right? I just read an article last week. Bird flu has been found in Austin. A rush again, produced the latest vaccination. But what do these all have in common, right? What is the biggest determinant of how your outcome is going to be from a flu or from a COVID or from just a viral infection in general? Is going to be the health of the host that gets sick, right? Can we agree on that? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Now this is pretty scary. When we talk about the health of this country and how it's continuing to get worse and worse and worse, cancer rates are at an all-time high in the United States, right? People are living longer with cancer due to some treatment, so that's good. However, the rates of cancer are at an all-time high, and the rates of cancer in young people is now beginning to increase. Over the last 4 or 5 years, by 1 to 2%, cancer rates are increasing in young people. Late 20s, early 30s. This is very scary because this has never been seen in cancer. Okay, so this is a BBC article just from October. But there's more and more information coming out on this, still brand new. All right. So like I mentioned, the health of the host ends up becoming one of the most important pieces of how your outcome to illness is going to be. Any viral infection in general, and this has been known for decades, right? This is basic concept of immunology. But it seems like when the pandemic hit and COVID was on the scene, all of our understanding of immunology that we've developed over the last 100 years went out the window, right? There's no vaccine. We don't know what to do. Panic. And by far the most mind-blowing observation I had from the pandemic was this. The last major pandemic was, who knows what the last major pandemic was? Any idea historically? 1918, yes. The Spanish flu of 1918, okay? 1918, the number one strategy they used to mitigate infection was social isolation. Fast forward 100 years, all the advancements in science, in medicine, and the understanding of immunology and nutrition. Fast forward 100 years, what was the primary tool that was used? Social isolation. That blew my mind because in 100 years, we could not put something together for a new viral infection that came on the scene. Craziness, right? And of course, the saving grace that we kept hearing on the news was the vaccine is coming, the vaccine is coming. Okay? We're on how many boosters now? 5 or 6? I lost count how many boosters we're at. And COVID continues to be one of the top 10 killers of Americans in the United States. Again, that goes back to what is the health of the host before they get sick determines the outcome of how they deal with that illness. Okay? And I think that's pretty obvious now. With COVID brought a lot of this to light. There's tons of research now. Comorbidities was all the talk, right? The more comorbidities you had, the worse outcomes you were going to have to COVID. But like I mentioned before, this is a concept that's been known for decades in immunology. Even in surgery, the healthier you are going into a surgery, whatever it may be, the better recovery and outcomes you have. The worse health you have going into a surgery, higher risk for complications. Okay? Immunology works the exact same way. Who remembers what some of the biggest comorbidities were that they talked about around COVID? Obesity was a big one. What else? Anybody else? Diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, also one of the top ones. What else? Elderly. That's a good one. But why elderly? They have partially that. 92% of seniors in the United States have 2 or more comorbid conditions already. So that's almost all of them, right? And these are all chronic disease, chronic health issues that again points back towards diet, nutrition, lifestyle, their environment, and how they're caring for themselves. Make sense? The last big one was high blood pressure, and then a previous history of cardiovascular issues. Again, largely metabolic diseases. Okay? So I got ahead of myself. So metabolic diseases. Metabolic diseases meaning how your body takes and absorbs food and either uses it for energy or stores it as fat in the liver or stores it as excess sugar in the blood, which is prediabetes, diabetes. Make sense? So those are the concepts of metabolic diseases. If we look at the top 9 killers, health-related killers of Americans in the United States, this is the list. Heart disease, cancer, lower respiratory diseases, stroke and cerebrovascular diseases, Alzheimer's, which has come on the scene within the last 5-10 years, diabetes, type 2 diabetes specifically, influenza and pneumonia, kidney disease, COVID-19. Okay? Again, all of these are largely metabolic diseases brought on by our environment, the foods we eat, and our lifestyle choices, how we exercise, if we exercise, and so on and so forth, how we sleep, all that. Make sense? Even something like kidney disease, which we could argue may not be metabolic, what would you guess is the number 1 cause of kidney disease? Poor diet causing diabetes. Diabetes will destroy your kidneys. So will uncontrolled high blood pressure. Okay? Number 1 cause of amputations in the United States, uncontrolled diabetes. Okay? All right. So enough all the doom and gloom. I think you guys got the point, right? So how can we bulletproof our immune system? How can we improve the health of the host to improve outcomes later? In a nutshell, this is the combination of things. I call this level 1, and there's going to be a level 2 here. So your diet, right? What I do with people when I work on them one-on-one is we do a detailed dive into, I have them journal for a week, what they eat, what time they're eating. Right? Those are the main things I like to know. We look at their sleep habits. We run comprehensive blood work to identify nutritional deficiencies, inflammatory markers in the blood, so I can build a very personalized program, right? On a general, for a class like this, generally, diet-wise, we're looking at focus on eating meat and vegetables, a little bit of fruit. The most basic concept. Meat, vegetables, a little bit of fruit. Okay? The big one is cut out the ultra-processed foods. Anything that's packaged, pre-made, you have to cut it out because it's filled with additives, excess sodiums, and many of the other preservative chemicals like the red dye that we just spoke about, right? So on a basic concept, that's the way you eat. When we talk about sleep, having a regular sleep schedule is the biggest one, right? And you're getting anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of sleep, but it has to be continuous sleep. Oftentimes I'll get people say, well, I slept 4 hours, but I took a nap in the middle of the day for another 4 hours, so that's 8 hours that I slept. But you have to sleep according to your circadian rhythms, right? So when the sun comes up, the brain's supposed to wake up. You have a whole hormonal reaction. When the sun goes down, our hormones change. The brain shuts down. That's your normal circadian rhythm. What's interesting is the circadian rhythms is controlled by a part of the brain that also becomes damaged in Alzheimer's disease, right? So this is a big important link between sleep and sleep quality and degeneration of the brain like in Alzheimer's, okay? Even Alzheimer's, I don't know if you guys noticed, Alzheimer's was on my list of top 9 killers, is largely a metabolic environmental disease. And I can give you guys a whole nother workshop on just preventing Alzheimer's and all the research that's come out in the last 5 years on the topic, but it's huge. Stress and how someone deals with stress. And this is an interesting one because a lot of patients will come in and their chronic health conditions, their doctors tell them, oh, it's stress, it's stress. That's an oversimplification. Stress is subjective. Everybody perceives stress differently. What is stressful for you may not be stressful for me, or what's extremely stressful for me may be slightly stressful for you, but not so much, right? So the question it becomes, how do you handle that stressor, and what activities do you do to kind of center yourself again? Either it be meditation or exercise. I personally like the couple sauna use with just mindfulness thinking. That seems to work really well for me, right? So things like that. And then minimizing toxin exposure. This is something that has really recently come on my radar, especially when it comes to cancer. For years, billions was invested into finding genetic causes of cancer. But what they're finding out now, the majority of people don't even have the genetic markers of cancer, which leaves the environment being the biggest cause of it, right? And like I was talking about the red dye number 3 that we just spoke about, there's toxins everywhere in our environment. And there's methods now that we can test this in patients commercially through urine or through blood. So I've just started doing this on people, and really we take a deep dive in their cosmetics, their lotions, their creams, but even furniture in your homes, yeah. Yeah, heavy metals. Yes. Yeah. So, you're alluding to that. Yes, heavy metals. Yeah, absolutely. In even some of the nut milks end up having a lot of. Yeah, they say even the organic ones are the leading. Yeah. Leading ones. Yeah, absolutely. So this is another source of toxicity, right? The fires in LA that are going on right now. I just read that the smoke is so bad that the concentration of lead in the air is exponentially high. Lead is a heavy metal, toxin exposure, right? What are the repercussions of that years later, right? So we can test these things in the blood and urine now. Fire retardants is another big one. I don't know what it is in Texas, but in California, there's a law that all furniture and carpeting has to be sprayed with fire retardant. Well, fire retardant, those chemicals have been linked to Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and cancer. Right? So, crazy stuff. Level 2 of kind of overall health and bulletproofing your immune system gets into cold exposure, heat exposure, and meditation and deep breathing. Right? And I say level 2 just because these are things you can implement on a day-to-day basis. These you have to have access to a place like this, like Restore, or have your own sauna at home or cold exposure at home. Make sense? It's my dream to have a personalized sauna at my house someday. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about sauna use. So I briefly skimmed the research on sauna use and its roles in preventing cold and flu and viral infections, and there's a ton out there. Right? This is just a couple. Reduces risk of pneumonia in middle-aged males. Incidence of cold and flus. So in this study, this one was interesting. It was a small sample size, but they took 25 people and had them use the sauna regularly. They took other 25 people and didn't have them use the sauna, and they tracked them over the next 6 months to see who got sick with the cold and how long it lasted. And the sauna users decreased their colds by 50% compared to the non-sauna users, right? Pretty crazy, huh? Just from regular sauna use. Yeah.
What is it about sauna use?
Yeah, the heat. So the heat has benefits around stimulating the immune system, creating certain proteins that are beneficial to growth hormones, and there's a lot of cardiovascular benefits too. So the heat creates an artificial state of stress for the body, but a good stress. And so the body's natural response to a stress is to fight against it. And so the aftermath of that is a lot of beneficial hormones and chemicals that are great for cardiovascular health, for the brain, and for the immune system. That's the same thing was happening with cold exposure, right? As much as difficult as it may be, it's a controlled state of stress, and the body has good responses to it in a controlled environment. Okay? Yeah, so the research is mixed on it. Temperature tends to be a factor too. I believe the last research I read was saying about 3 to 4 times a week sauna use. But you can get benefits just from one. The more you use it, the benefits compound on top of each other. Yeah. Okay, and that one. All right, so let's talk about micronutrient deficiencies, right? This is where the IVs and the intramuscular injections really shine. Now, the beginning of COVID, remember, there were no treatments, there was no vaccine, there was no strategy. And what I started doing is I sat down and started looking at all the research, because from a holistic approach, a holistic lens, I thought to myself, there has to be some information out there on what can be done that's not pharmaceutical based. And sure enough, vitamins, minerals, different herbal products, there's tons and tons of research out there so showing that you can influence the immune system positively with them, that you can decrease respiratory and viral infections with them. They're just not part of traditional medical practice, right? The information is there. It's just not talked about, and it's not used. And I started reaching out to my other holistic doctor networks to see what they were doing. Because remember, at this time, if you got sick with COVID, the official statement was do nothing. It was stay at home, isolate. If you start to have issues with breathing, then come to the hospital, which they weren't doing anything anyways in the hospital. They would just watch you and then eventually put you on a respirator if you needed it, right? So this was the standard of care. Do nothing for what? Probably most of the first year of the pandemic, right? I mean, at least you can try some vitamins, minerals that you can get at the grocery store, as opposed to just wait until you can't breathe at home, right? So I dove into the research, and reaching out to my networks of other holistic doctors, I found a doctor in Michigan he was a medical doctor, and he had a very small private holistic clinic, just him, another doctor, and like 3 nurses. So they were a very small scale. And what they were doing is they were actually treating all their COVID patients with a combination of vitamins and IVs. He published his research later, and out of 110 patients, only 2 were hospitalized, the rest, and had no deaths, and the rest, all their symptoms resolved within a day or two using this same approach I'm going to talk to you about. And so I was following his research. Every day he was doing a vlog, and he was interviewing patients so they could tell their experience of the treatment, how they felt before, what the hospitals told them to do, and the struggles with breathing, and then going through their treatment and how they recovered. And so I was following that, and then all of a sudden one day, it all got taken down. And there was an official statement on his website that said, the FTC sent us a letter and said, we cannot have this information open to the public, and he had to pull it all off. The FTC. And the letter said, you cannot say that you're helping treat COVID patients because the official statement is that there is no treatment for COVID. So people were left with, you have to stay home, do nothing until you can't breathe. Then you can go to the hospital, likely be put on a respirator. Okay? So what he was doing, and I've tested this now on a bunch of patients and on myself as well for years, and this, for me, this is the secret sauce. Okay? Vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin C, and magnesium. Okay? Now, when we talk about each one of these individually, the number one vitamin deficiency in the United States, by far, is vitamin D. Okay? I test vitamin D on everybody, all my patients. If we say I test 100 people, 3 of those 100 had healthy vitamin D levels. That's how bad this is. And I hear all the time here in Austin say, well, it's so sunny out. I'm out in the sun all the time because the sun can't increase your vitamin D levels. Yes, that's true, but your skin works as a solar panel. The more of that solar panel you expose, the more vitamin D you're going to make and convert. If you're not hanging out in like a swimsuit all the time in the sun, you're not making enough vitamin D. Okay? If you're only exposing from here down, you're not making enough vitamin D. And then if you put lotions, creams, sunblock on top of that, it blocks your synthesis of vitamin D. You're still not making any, right? And by far the 3, let's say that, for example, the 3 that did have healthy vitamin D levels, they were all supplementing it already. Right? So you have, this is one of the ones you have to supplement.
Does most sunscreens block the intake of vitamin D?
Yes, correct, yeah. So usually my recommendation is 15, 20 minutes of unfiltered sunlight. And then if you're out at the lake or at the pool, then put your sunblock on after, right? 15, 20 minutes of, so that there's an argument for tanning beds to some degree, small controlled exposures, especially in the winter months when you don't see the sun very much, to maximize vitamin D levels that way, or you can supplement it, okay? All right. A lot of research also came out during COVID and towards the end of COVID that in addition to comorbid factors, those with the lowest vitamin D levels when they were hospitalized had the worst outcomes from COVID. And those with the healthier vitamin D levels had the best outcomes, less severe outcomes. Make sense? What's interesting is even prior to COVID, there's already tons of research on vitamin D improving symptom outcomes from just respiratory illness in general. But a lot more was published afterwards because of COVID. Okay. All right, vitamin A. Let's talk about vitamin A. This is another very important secret one. Back in the early 90s, vitamin A was being used to treat kids with measles in developing countries. And they realized that a high dose of vitamin A reduced measles symptoms and mortality rate tremendously, just with vitamin A by itself. This is something it's hard to get from our food supply. Really, vitamin A is found mostly in animal products, beef liver, cod liver, and like bone broths or bone marrow. Okay? Very important vitamin A. And it's almost never talked about. Vitamin C. Vitamin C is a big one to support the immune system. The trick with vitamin C is the dosage. With any of these is the dosage. You can take it orally. You can take any of these orally, But in IV, it works a lot better because vitamin C, the way we discover what your appropriate dosage is for vitamin C is that we have you dose on it until you get immediate diarrhea. Okay? Because when you overdo it, it's water soluble. So when you hit your threshold, it'll make you go to the bathroom real fast. And when we discover that, well, then we taper down slightly. And just below that threshold is where we hang out as your therapeutic dose. Okay? And with an IV, you don't have that problem because you don't have to go through the digestive system to get vitamin C into the system. So you can dose high doses of vitamin C and not worry about that. Right? With any of these, if you take it in an IV, you have the advantage of you don't have to wait for it to go through the digestive tract, hope that it gets absorbed. People with chronic GI issues have trouble with absorbing fat-soluble vitamins or just fats in general. So that's a variable. And IVs bypass that. All right. So in that, the doctors in Michigan that were using vitamin C, they were dosing, and I should say for most of these, when we dose this for someone who's trying to fight infection, we're dosing at 4, 5, 6 times above what the recommendation is on the bottle. Okay? I get a lot of people, they'll buy these on their own, they'll take them, but they're taking what's recommended on the bottle. When your immune system is being challenged with an infection, your immune system utilizes these. It eats up these nutrients. And so you need to replenish them at a higher rate than they're being consumed. This is how we reach what's called a therapeutic dose, not just a maintenance dose. Make sense? So vitamin C, we're looking at 3 or 4 times a day, taking it orally, just below that therapeutic range. Okay? Magnesium, super important, also found in some of the IVs that are offered here. This is the number one nutrient deficiency, mineral deficiency in the United States, magnesium. Right? We're just not getting these from our food anymore. And there's many reasons for that. One of the biggest is the soil in the United States is becoming so run down with pesticide and herbicide use that the microbiome of the soil is just depleted of nutrients. And so it's producing food that is reduced in its overall vitamins and minerals. Make sense? All right. And after I finish up here, one of the nurses will talk to you about the different IVs and IVs types and which ones have a lot of these new ingredients in them. All right. So I've been testing this on patients for a long time. Dr. Brownstein, which was the doctor out in Michigan, this was a lot of what he was using as phase 1. Then the frontline COVID doctors came on the scene. They had their own recommendations. A lot of it did overlap with this. They started incorporating also zinc and then glutathione as well, right? Glutathione is a big one. You can get a whole IV here that's just glutathione based, but it's a very potent antioxidant. And it turns out the immune system also depletes antioxidant levels when it's challenged with infection, right? So this is a really good go-to as well to incorporate in here overall. Perfect. Any questions on that? No? Yeah.
I feel like I hear a lot about the different kinds of magnesium, like which is good for what. So specifically, are you saying magnesium in general, or is there like a certain one?
Yeah. In this case, magnesium in general. Personally, I think there's not a huge difference between the magnesium types other than magnesium L-threonate. Right, have you heard of that one? Okay, so there's a bunch. Yeah, there's a bunch. In general, I don't think it makes a huge difference. The L-threonate type of magnesium is the one being used a lot for concussion and brain injuries because it crosses through the blood-brain barrier. Yeah. Otherwise, the others, not a huge deal. Magnesium also is another one that'll give you immediate diarrhea when you overdose it. Makes sense? So again, how do you find your therapeutic dose? Keep taking it till you go to the bathroom and then taper down. Or get an IV. Yeah, get a drip.
Magnesium is supposed to help us sleep too, right?
Yes.
And why is that?
So magnesium is one of the few minerals that actually is a central nervous system depressant. So it helps wind things down versus get you amped up. right? Which is typically associated with like B vitamins or B12, for example, right? B12 for energy. Magnesium has a very calming effect on the nervous system. Awesome. Perfect. All right. So I'll wrap up and then we'll have Sonia come up and talk to you guys about some of the ingredients in the IVs. But for those of you that are here, I want to offer you guys a free consultation, one-on-one. This gives us a chance to meet. If you do have health goals or health challenges, we can meet one-on-one and speak about those, see what you've done or what you haven't done, what kind of tests you've had done or maybe should have done. And we can discuss those all one-on-one. And then anybody that's here today and you decide to move forward after that consult with one-on-one services, you get 15% off any kind of treatment plans we create for you. Right? All you got to do is text the word immune to this number. Right? And my front desk will reach out to you, get you set up for the free consult, and we'll keep this deal on hand for you.